The child's wheelchair stopped in front of the stairs. "You can't come in here," the security guard shouted. "You're not normal." Little Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't make a sound. He just pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Dad," he whispered. It happened again. 20 minutes later, a sound like an airport echoed overhead. As the military helicopter descended, that security guard faced something he never expected. 8-year-old Ethan Reeves lived his world on wheels. His bright blue wheelchair wasn't just transportation, it was his freedom, his independence, his way of exploring a world that too often forgot children like him existed. But Ethan wasn't bitter, not yet. His father had taught him that strength came from within, that courage wasn't about walking, it was about standing up for what's right, no matter how you got there. Ethan lived with his mother Sarah in a small apartment on the outskirts of Colorado Springs. The walls were covered with his drawings, soldiers, helicopters, and always, always a small figure in a wheelchair standing proud beside them. His father, Major David Reeves, had been deployed to Afghanistan for the past 8 months. Every night before bed, Ethan would video call his dad, sharing his day, his dreams, his struggles. "Dad, kids at school stared again today," he would say. "Son," Major Reeves would reply, his voice steady despite the distance. "Let them stare. They're just trying to understand strength they've never seen before." Ethan was born with spina bifida, a condition that left his legs paralyzed. But what he lacked in mobility, he made up for in spirit. He was the fastest wheelchair racer in his class, the smartest kid in his grade, and had a smile that could light up the darkest room. His teachers adored him. His classmates, well, most of them, respected him. But the adult world? That was different. The adult world still saw the chair first and the child second. That Tuesday started like any other. Sarah had promised Ethan a special day out, lunch at his favorite restaurant, followed by a trip to the Natural History Museum. It was their weekly tradition while Dad was away, something to keep their spirits high during the long deployment. "Ready for our adventure, little man?" Sarah asked, helping Ethan into the car. "Always ready, Mom," he grinned, his father's determination shining in his eyes. The restaurant went fine. A few stares, but nothing unusual. It was at the museum where everything changed. The Colorado Springs Natural History Museum stood like a fortress of knowledge, its grand stone steps leading to massive wooden doors. Steps. Always steps. Ethan's wheelchair approached the building with excitement. This was his favorite place in the world. The dinosaur exhibits, the planetarium, the interactive displays that made him feel like he could touch the stars. Sarah pushed him toward what she assumed would be the accessible entrance. That's when they met him. Marcus Webb, head of security, stood at the main entrance like a gatekeeper. 40-something, ex-military build, but his service had clearly been forgotten somewhere along the way. His uniform was pressed, his badge polished, but his eyes held something cold, a man who had forgotten what he once sworn to protect. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely. "Where's the wheelchair-accessible entrance?" Marcus looked down at Ethan, then back at Sarah. His expression soured. "Museum's at capacity," he said flatly. Sarah blinked. "I'm sorry? I said we're at capacity. Fire code. Can't let anyone else in." But even as he spoke, a group of teenagers walked right past him through the main doors. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Sir, we have tickets. We come here every week." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to make sure Ethan could hear every word. "Look, lady, we've had problems with situations like this before. Wheelchairs block the aisles. Other visitors complain. It's a safety hazard." Ethan's small hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests. He'd heard this before. Different places, same words, always the same shame. "My son has every right to visit this museum," Sarah said, her voice rising. Marcus shrugged. "Not today, he doesn't. Try the children's library down the street, more appropriate for his condition." The words hit Ethan like physical blows. Around them, other families slowed their walk. Phones came out, but no one intervened. They just watched. Some whispered. A few actually nodded in agreement with Marcus. Ethan felt that familiar burn in his chest, the one that came when the world reminded him he was different. But this time, something else stirred inside him. Something his father had planted during their late-night calls. "Son," his dad had said just last week, "when the world tries to make you small, you call me. Distance doesn't matter. I'll always come running." With trembling fingers, Ethan pulled out his phone, a simple device his father had given him before deployment. He scrolled to the contact labeled Dad and pressed call. It rang once, twice. Ethan? Major Reeves' voice was sharp with immediate concern. What's wrong, buddy? Dad, Ethan whispered, trying not to let Marcus hear. The museum man says I can't come in. He says I'm not normal. Silence on the line. Then, quietly, put me on speaker, son. Ethan looked up at his mother, who nodded. He pressed the speaker button. Who am I speaking to? Major Reeves' voice cut through the Colorado afternoon air like steel. Marcus rolled his eyes. Sir, this is private property, and we have policies. I asked who I'm speaking to, the voice interrupted. Name and position. Marcus Webb, head of security. Look, I don't know who you think you are, but Marcus Webb, the voice repeated. Former Army, discharged in 2015, correct? Marcus went pale. Sarah noticed his hands start to shake slightly. How do you? Because I make it my business to know the men who served under me, Sergeant Webb, even the ones who forgot what service means. The words hung in the air like thunder. Around them, the growing crowd of onlookers went silent. Phones were recording now, openly. That boy you're refusing entry to? That's my son. And in the 8 months I've been deployed, he's raised over $3,000 for military families through his wheelchair racing. He volunteers at the VA hospital every Saturday, reading to wounded veterans. He's 8 years old, Webb, and he has more honor in his little finger than you've shown today. Marcus stumbled backward. Sir, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care to ask. You saw a wheelchair and decided my son was less than human. Ethan watched the security guards change from arrogance to something approaching panic. Dad, Ethan said softly into the phone, you don't have to. Yes, I do, son. Sometimes the fight comes to you, and you don't get to choose the battlefield. From the phone speaker came the sound of movement, voices, radio chatter. Ethan, I need you to move away from the building, take Mom's hand, and go sit by the fountain. Can you do that for me? Dad, what are you? Trust me, buddy. 20 minutes. Just wait 20 minutes. The line went dead. Sarah looked confused, but she trusted her husband. She wheeled Ethan away from Marcus Webb, who now stood alone at the museum entrance, confusion and growing dread written across his face. They waited by the fountain in the museum's courtyard. Other families kept their distance, some still recording with their phones, others just staring. Ethan sat quietly in his wheelchair, his hands folded in his lap. He wasn't crying anymore. His father was coming, and somehow that made all the difference. 18 minutes later, they heard it. A low rumbling, growing louder. Then the distinctive whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors. The crowd looked up as a military Black Hawk helicopter appeared over the museum, circling once before landing in the large courtyard parking area. The wind from its rotors sent dust and leaves swirling, people covering their eyes and backing away. The engine wound down, the rotors slowed, and the side door slid open. Major David Reeves stepped out in full combat uniform, followed by 6 other soldiers. His boots hit the pavement with purpose as he strode toward the museum entrance where his son waited. But he wasn't alone. Behind the soldiers came someone else, a woman in a sharp business suit with a briefing folder in her hand. Then another man in military dress uniform with more stars on his shoulders than anyone in the crowd had ever seen in person. The crowd parted like water as Major Reeves walked straight to where Ethan sat. He knelt down beside the wheelchair and wrapped his son in the kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. Hey, buddy, he whispered. Did you miss me? Ethan buried his face in his father's shoulder, 8 months of separation melting away in seconds. Dad, you came home. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Major Reeves stood and looked around at the crowd that had gathered. His voice carried the authority of command when he spoke. My name is Major David Reeves, 10th Special Forces Group. This is my son Ethan, 8 years old, paralyzed from birth, honor roll student, volunteer, fundraiser, and the bravest person I know. He turned toward Marcus Webb, who had been trying to disappear into the crowd. Sergeant Webb, front and center. Marcus approached reluctantly, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Sergeant, do you remember the oath you took when you enlisted? Yes, sir. Recite it. Marcus's voice cracked as he spoke. I, Marcus Webb, do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Continue. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And what does the Constitution say about equal treatment, Sergeant? Sir, I made a mistake. Major Reeves stepped closer. You didn't make a mistake, Webb. Mistakes are accidental. You made a choice. You chose to see my son as less than human because he can't walk. The woman in the business suit stepped forward. Mr. Webb, I'm Director Janet Stevens from the museum's board. You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. But Major Reeves held up a hand. Ma'am, with respect, that's not why I'm here. He turned back to face the crowd, his son beside him in the wheelchair. I didn't fly 7,000 miles to get one man fired. I came here because my son called me, and when your child needs you, distance doesn't matter. Time zones don't matter. Nothing matters except showing up. He knelt down beside Ethan again. Son, what do you want to do? Ethan looked up at the museum, then at Marcus Webb, then at his father. Can we go see the dinosaurs now? And can Mr. Webb come too? The crowd gasped. Marcus Webb's eyes filled with tears. Major Reeves smiled, the first time he'd smiled in months. That's my boy. He stood and addressed Webb one more time. Sergeant, you have a choice. You can walk away, go home, and forget this happened. Or you can spend the afternoon learning about honor from an 8-year-old boy in a wheelchair. Marcus Webb, former soldier, failed security guard, and broken man, looked down at Ethan Reeves. The child who had every right to hate him was offering forgiveness. I'd like to learn, sir, if he'll have me. Ethan grinned, his father's smile. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Webb. Dad taught me that. As they walked into the museum together, the major, his son, his wife, a humbled former soldier, and a crowd of witnesses who would never forget what they'd seen. Someone in the group whispered, "That's what a hero looks like." But Major Reeves heard it and shook his head. He pointed down at his son. "That's what a hero looks like. I just showed up when he called." The story of Ethan Reeves and the museum didn't end that day. It spread across social media, not as a viral moment of shame, but as a reminder of what love looks like when it has no limits. The museum implemented immediate accessibility training for all staff. Marcus Webb, instead of being fired, was reassigned to work specifically with disabled visitors, becoming one of their most requested guides. Major Reeves extended his leave to spend 2 weeks with his family, but more importantly, he returned to deployment with a renewed understanding of why he served. And Ethan? He continued visiting the museum every week, often bringing other children from the local children's hospital. His favorite exhibit remained the dinosaurs, but now he had a new story to tell about them. "See that T-Rex?" he'd say to visiting kids. He was different too. He had tiny arms, but he was still the king of the dinosaurs. Sometimes being different just means you're stronger in ways people can't see yet. 3 months later, Ethan received an invitation that would change his perspective forever. The Pentagon had heard his story, and they wanted him to visit, not as a charity case, not as a photo opportunity, but as an honored guest. The Secretary of Defense himself had requested the meeting. Major Reeves, now back from deployment, accompanied his son to Washington, D.C. As they entered the Pentagon's halls, Ethan's wheelchair rolled past portraits of generals and heroes, past rooms where the nation's most crucial decisions were made. But the most important room they visited wasn't the secretary's office. It was the Wounded Warrior Rehabilitation Center. There, Ethan met Master Sergeant Jennifer Collins, a triple amputee who had lost both legs and her left arm in a roadside bombing in Syria. She sat in a wheelchair similar to Ethan's, but hers was equipped with advanced prosthetics that allowed her to paint intricate murals on the facility's walls. "I heard about what happened at your museum," she said, her brush never stopping as she added detail to a painting of soldiers helping wounded comrades. "And I heard about what you did afterward." Ethan looked confused. "I didn't do anything special, ma'am." Jennifer smiled, the kind of smile that held both pain and triumph. "Son, you could have let that security guard's ignorance make you bitter. Instead, you chose forgiveness. That's not just special, that's leadership." She showed Ethan her latest painting, a young boy in a wheelchair, surrounded by towering dinosaurs, all of them standing proud despite their differences. At the bottom, she had written, "Strength comes in all forms." "This is for you," she said, carefully removing the canvas from its easel. To remind you that every time someone tries to make you feel small, you're actually showing them what real strength looks like. Ethan stared at the painting, then at Jennifer. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do people still stare at you? Jennifer laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Every day. But I've learned something important, Ethan. When people stare, they're not always seeing weakness. Sometimes they're trying to figure out how to find that kind of strength in themselves. From across the room, Major Reeves watched his son absorb this wisdom. The boy who had called him in tears just months ago was now sitting straighter in his wheelchair, his young mind processing lessons that would shape the man he would become. The visit to Washington lasted 3 days. Ethan toured the Smithsonian, met with congressional representatives, and even sat in on a briefing about new accessibility initiatives for military facilities. But the moment that stayed with him happened on their last day. They were leaving the hotel when Ethan noticed an elderly veteran sitting alone on a bench outside. The man's left sleeve was pinned up, an amputee. He sat perfectly still, watching the world go by with eyes that held decades of unspoken stories. Ethan asked his father to wait, then wheeled over to the bench. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely. "My dad says you served our country." The veteran looked down, surprised. "Yes, son. A long time ago." "Thank you," Ethan said simply. "My dad's deployed sometimes, and I know it's hard to be away from family." The old soldier's eyes softened. "What's your name, young man?" "Ethan Reeves. My dad's Major Reeves, 10th Special Forces." Recognition flickered in the veteran's eyes. "You're the museum boy." Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." The veteran leaned forward. "I saw the video online, what you did for that security guard, offering forgiveness when you had every right to be angry. That took real courage, son." "My dad taught me that holding on to anger just makes you tired," Ethan replied. "And besides, everyone deserves a chance to be better." The veteran smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. "Your father raised a good man." As they prepared to leave Washington, Ethan realized something had changed inside him. The boy who once felt ashamed of his wheelchair now saw it differently. It wasn't a limitation, it was a platform, a place from which he could reach others who felt different, forgotten, or misunderstood. 6 months after the museum incident, Ethan started a nonprofit organization called Rolling Strong. With his mother's help and his father's support, he began visiting schools, hospitals, and community centers, sharing his story and connecting with other children who faced physical challenges. His message was always the same: different doesn't mean less than. It means you have a unique story to tell. The organization grew beyond anything they had imagined. Donations poured in from across the country. Volunteers signed up in droves. But most importantly, children began reaching out. Kids who had felt alone in their struggles now had someone who understood. Marcus Webb, the former security guard, became one of Rolling Strong's most dedicated volunteers. He worked with Ethan every Saturday, helping to organize events and share his own story of transformation. The man who had once seen wheelchairs as problems now saw them as symbols of strength. "I tell people," Marcus would say during their events, "that I learned more about courage from an 8-year-old boy than I did in 4 years of military service. Sometimes the teacher comes in the form you least expect." 1 year after the helicopter landed at the museum, Ethan returned for a special ceremony. The Colorado Springs Natural History Museum was dedicating a new wing, the Reeves Accessibility Center. It featured state-of-the-art accommodations for visitors with disabilities, interactive exhibits designed for wheelchair users, and a special theater where Ethan would give monthly presentations about finding your superpower. As the ribbon was cut, Ethan looked out at the crowd that had gathered. His father stood behind him in dress uniform. His mother wiped away proud tears. Marcus Webb clapped enthusiastically from the front row. Master Sergeant Collins had flown in from Washington to attend. But scattered throughout the audience were dozens of children in wheelchairs, on crutches, with prosthetics, and with invisible disabilities. They had come not just for the ceremony, but to see proof that their differences could become their strengths. "A year ago," Ethan said into the microphone, his young voice carrying across the crowd, "a man told me I couldn't enter this museum because I was different. Today, I'm here to tell every kid listening, Being different is your superpower. You just have to learn how to use it. The applause was thunderous, but Ethan wasn't finished. And to every adult here, I want to say thank you. Thank you for seeing us, really seeing us. Because when you see past our wheelchairs, our braces, our differences, you see our dreams. And dreams don't need legs to run. In a world that moves too fast to notice the quiet struggles happening right beside us, Ethan Reeves reminds us that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it walks, sometimes it rolls, sometimes it flies 7,000 miles in a helicopter because love knows no distance. Sometimes it forgives when forgiveness seems impossible. Sometimes it builds bridges where walls once stood. And sometimes it teaches us that the very thing that makes us different is exactly what the world needs most. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear combat boots and answer phone calls from their children. Sometimes they wear courage, disguised as forgiveness, and teach grown men what honor really means. What would you do if you saw a child being denied basic dignity? Would you speak up or would you look away? Share your thoughts below. And remember, we all have the power to be someone's hero, even if it's just for one afternoon at a museum. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Because somewhere, there's another child who needs to know that being different doesn't mean being less than. And somewhere, there's another parent who needs to remember that when your child calls, nothing else matters. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what courage looks like and why the smallest voices sometimes carry the biggest truths.